Hey everybody, Chris Americos here, and in this video I'm going to tell you why Russian sounds rude and why people think Russian speakers sound rude. You might be surprised. So let me tell you a little bit of a backstory just before we get started, okay? I lived in Russia for 8 years and I started multiple businesses in Russia, but before I went to Russia, I only studied the alphabet a couple times. I didn't speak the language at all. I didn't know anything about Russia or the Russian language. I had never read, Dostoevsky or Pushkin or anything like that. At university I didn't study Russian, so I really didn't know anything before I went there. And, not knowing the language and not understanding the culture, it just forced me to observe body language and behavior, right? And interactions in a different way without understanding the actual content of what was being said. And to me, it seemed like people were really, really rude. And that was surprising to me because I didn't really understand how society could operate that way. Because in the West, in Europe and in the United States, Canada, etc., we usually think that there are standards of politeness and standards of manners that everyone should follow. And when someone doesn't, we like to make a big deal out of it. We like to complain about it, fuss about it, and we like to make sure that this doesn't happen again. We want people to follow the standards of politeness and manners. But it's different in Russia. So let's talk about why, especially Westerners, think that Russian and Russian speakers sound rude. So the first reason that it sounds rude sometimes is because of lots of consonant clusters. And if you don't know what a consonant cluster is, consonant is letters like B, C, D, F, G, not vowels, A, E, I, O, U. Those are vowels. Consonants are other letters, and these sounds that consonants make are hard, right? They sound hard when they're put together. Now, you might have some idea about how German sounds, and that German sounds very hard. Well, a lot of people actually who don't have any experience with German or with Russian might think that both of these languages sound similar because they both have a lot of consonant clusters. So, at the beginning of a word in English, if we have the letters P and S, like in the word psychology, then we don't pronounce P because these two sounds don't go together at the beginning of English words. In our rules of pronunciation in English, you can't say these sounds together. But in Russian, you can. So I remember one time somebody asked a Russian guy, "Hey, where are you from?" And he says, "Pskov." Now, Pskov is a city in Russia. It's a normal answer, but it sounded really rude and really aggressive because of these hard sounds at the beginning of the word. So one misinterpretation of Russian by Westerners is that these consonant clusters and these hard sounds make it rude, make what the person is saying sound very rude. And so when you have all of these combinations of consonant sounds, people think that it sounds hard and it sounds aggressive, but that's not really true. So the second reason that people think Russian is rude and people who speak Russian sound rude is because in Russian, it's less common to say words like please and thank you. Now, let me clarify what I mean here, because anyone who's Russian who's watching this is going to say, "Chris, come on, we say those words." Yeah, they say them, but they say them a lot less than we do. They don't say them in every situation and every time that we might say them, right? In English, I'm talking about. So what I mean is that, for example, you ask someone to do something for you. In English, we always say please, right? Maybe you're with your family or your friends, you're at the dinner table, and you say, "Can you please pass me the salt?" Well, in Russian, it would be not common, it's uncommon for people to usually say "пожалуйста" when you're with friends and family. Instead, you would just say something like, "Give me that," or "Could you give me that?" or something like this. But usually it's just, "Give me the salt." And you say it with intonation that's not aggressive and not rude. Of course, if you say it in a very commanding way, like an order, then it might sound a little more rude. But still, most people would not think that that's really a rude thing to say because there weren't any rude words. And because you don't have to say these words all the time. You don't have to say them in order to be polite. You can leave them out and still be polite. Or for example, if the waiter comes and gives you your food at a restaurant, in English we usually say, "Oh, thank you," right? Like, I appreciate that you have done your job. But in Russian, it's strange to say it. When a waiter comes and brings the food to you, most people aren't going to say thank you every time. Now, remember that there are some people who do. And in my experience, just a little experience, 8 years in Russia, businesses there, going back and forth every year still. In my experience, there aren't really that many people who are so polite that they say please and thank you all the time. I've met a few of them, but it's the exception to the rule. Most people don't use these words all the time, and especially even the people who are very, very polite, when they are with their wife or their children or their family, and even with their close friends, they usually don't say these words and definitely don't say them as much as we do. So next time that you think about this whole concept of saying please and thank you, think about when it's really necessary to say it. Is it really necessary to say thank you to someone because they did the thing that they were supposed to do? Well, most Russian speakers would think, no, it's not. He just did his job, and that's it. And he was supposed to do it. So why do I need to thank him? Why do I need to show extra gratitude to a person who's just doing a simple thing or a thing that is usual or a thing that he should do already, right? So I would say that I agree with the Russian perspective here that in English we use it too much and it becomes insincere. You see what we are doing here? Because in English we use it all the time. It's almost expected. And when something is expected, it's taken for granted. So it loses a lot of its meaning. Whereas if you use it less often, then when you actually say it, it means something. So I'm not saying that Russian is better in this aspect. I'm saying that probably in Russian, people could stand to be a little more polite. And by polite, I mean using these polite words, please and thank you, right? In Russian, people could stand to be a little more polite. And in English, people could stand to be a little less polite because it comes across as insincere when you do it all the time and it's just expected instead of communicating something of real meaning. Okay, the next reason that a lot of people think that Russian and Russian speakers are rude is because of excuse me. And this is another instance of misunderstanding between English speakers and Russian speakers. In English, when you're walking somewhere, let's say you're in a shop, and you want to pass by someone, right? They're standing in the way and you can't move around them, you can't go past them. Usually in English, in this situation, we will say, excuse me, can I get through? Excuse me, can I pass you? Excuse me, could you move out of the way? Excuse me, and then we say something, right? We say excuse me to get someone's attention, and we say excuse me when we want to move past someone, and we say excuse me when we have done something wrong or made a small mistake, right? So in Russian, it's only about small mistakes. You wouldn't usually use the equivalent of excuse me in these other situations. The equivalent, I'm talking about the word извини or извините. This is like forgive me or excuse me. So, if you made a small mistake, then sure, you might say this. But when you want to move past someone on the bus, in a shop, there's two things that might happen in Russia typically. Number one is that typically a person just won't say anything. They'll just nudge you and move around you, really. They'll make contact with you, kind of push you to the side a little bit, and move around you. And when they make contact with you, you'll notice and you'll also move out of the way. Now, this always happens when you're on public transport, because if you spend so much time trying to, communicate with the person, getting them to move out of the way, and then if you're a foreigner too, and they might not understand you, then you might miss your bus stop. So it's just a fact that you need to get off the bus. So just push them out of the way a little bit. Now, that seems really, really rude to us English speakers or Westerners because we don't usually just touch someone or push them out of the way, right? We want to communicate and let them move out of the way on their own. However, typically what I've seen in my experience in Russia is that most people don't say anything and they just nudge the person a little bit and then they move past them. And this works. And in almost every situation I've never seen this situation lead to confrontation. Ever. surprisingly. But another thing about excuse me is you'll notice that a lot of foreigners, a lot of Westerners, English speakers, in Russia, they translate every please, every thank you, and every excuse me. And it sounds really awkward and weird in Russian because most Russian people don't speak like that. Again, there are some people who will say "извините" in order to get your attention or in order to move past you. But that is really rare in my experience. So, excuse me, for example, when we want to move around someone, instead of saying excuse me or instead of saying "извините", we could say "разрешите". And this means allow or give permission. So you're saying, would you allow me to move past you? Would you allow me to pass? Right? So this is what we can say instead. And again, this is very polite. So I've seen two situations. Either nudging the person a little bit. This is what I always see on public transport and in public places. And then if the person is polite, maybe they'll say something like «разрешите». And again, this is like allow me to pass. So if you want to get someone's attention in English, we might say, excuse me, could you tell me where the bank is? Now, this sounds really strange, and if you are a foreigner, people will absolutely know that you're not Russian if you say this. If you come up to someone and you say, извините, где банк? Right? Instead, we have other words that we can say to get the person's attention. Now, again, some people do use извините to get attention, but usually you're going to say something like, tell me where the bank is. Подскажите, где банк? Or you could say, you couldn't tell me where the bank is? Не подскажете, где банк? And so by saying this, of course, it's a command, right? It's not a question so much, unless we use question intonation. But if we say подскажите or не подскажете, then this is like, it gets their attention and it's already telling them what we need. We need them to tell us something. All right, so we should use this instead of excuse me. Okay, so if we want to move past someone, we can say разрешите, and if we want to get someone's attention, we can say подскажите or не подскажете, and then we ask our question. Okay, the next reason that people think that Russian is rude is because of direct language. I've already given you a few examples of this today, but using direct language is different because in English, we have a tendency to use indirect language. Using indirect language in English is a way that we are polite, that we show politeness and manners. And what do I mean by direct and indirect language? Indirect language is when we kind of ask a different question initially and then make a statement. Like, would you mind telling me where the bank is? Would you mind telling me where the bank is? So the real question here is, would you mind? Right? And indirectly we're asking, tell me where the bank is. In Russian, it's very strange to speak like this. It's very wordy and long, and most people don't speak like this, right? I've heard foreigners, I've heard Americans and English speakers do this all the time. They translate every long phrase of indirect language like this in English, and it doesn't sound right in Russian, right? Like, извините, вы не могли бы подсказать, где банк, пожалуйста? So there's just way too many words here when you could just say, где банк? Скажите, где банк? Подскажите, где банк? Something like this. So the difference really is that with direct language, you use more commands. You use more commands. Yeah. So in English, if we said, tell me where the bank is, then this sounds rude or even aggressive because it's a command. And in English, we understand that when we use direct language, it takes away the choice of the other person, right? It's a command. So I told you to do this, and you can either obey, which means that you're allowing me to influence you or you're giving in to what I've just told you to do, or you don't obey and now we have a conflict, right? And that's why indirect language is more polite in English. If we say, could you tell me where the bank is? And the person says, no, I couldn't. then it's okay and everybody drops it. But if you said, tell me where the bank is, and the person says, no, well, now we have some confrontation or conflict. And we want to avoid that in English. People don't like conflict. So in direct language, we can just say what we want directly without all of these extra polite words. And actually, from all of the Russian people who I've met and spoken with in the last decade or more than that, since 2009, most Russian people would prefer if you were just direct with them. They would prefer if you didn't disguise or camouflage your intent by using all of this indirect language and extra words. So actually, you're going to be more polite by saying and doing exactly what you think. Okay? Next. Actions speak louder than words. I think I've touched on this a little bit already. Now, we have this phrase in English, actions speak louder than words, and some people really believe this and live by this philosophy. But honestly, because we have all of this indirect language and because we want to avoid conflict and confrontation so much, and we don't want to step on other people's feet, right? We want to allow them to be free and make their own decisions, etc., etc. These are things that we're doing on a subconscious level. They've been programmed into us by our society, and within our language we have these things also. So actions and words, what's the difference? If you say in English, thanks so much for that invitation, I'll think about it and I'll let you know. Well, most people would think that means he's not going to come. But by his words, he actually said that he will let you know later. So if he doesn't contact you and he doesn't tell you that he's coming or he's not coming to whatever you've just invited him to, then that would be really rude to a Russian person. But to an English speaker, that might not be so rude, right? I invited him, he said he would think about it, that probably means no. He didn't contact me, he didn't show up, he just didn't want to come. And then we just leave it at that. Again, avoiding any conflict and avoiding bringing up that topic and confronting that person with the fact that they've just lied to you, really, right? Because they said that they would contact you and they didn't. Now, this happens all the time between English speakers. We want to be nice and friendly up front, and then when it comes down to business, when it comes down to the actions that we need to take that are behind the words that we've just said or the promise that we've just made, we let it go and we don't follow through. And then in the end, if anyone questions us, we can say, well, listen, it's my choice what I do with my time. It's my choice, right? We would argue that it's about freedom, and you're trying to control me by forcing me to live up to the words that I've promised, right? So it's very strange, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. In fact, it drives me crazy when English speakers do this. But in Russian, it's a really big deal. It's a really, really big deal. There's a phrase in Russian, mujik сказал, mujik сделал. And this means the man said it, the man did it. And it really means that if you are a real man, right? This is a big idea in the Russian language, not so much in English. It doesn't really mean anything to us, the real man, right? Sounds kind of funny, but in Russian it's important because the real man, it just means the man who is fulfilling the man's role in society. So actions speak louder than words, and this phrase, it provides evidence to that. Where if you promise, if you give your word, if you say that you're going to do something, even as small as contacting someone, and you don't do that, the repercussions of not doing that, the repercussions of you lying, are much greater. People will automatically kind of write you off and think, that guy is flaky, I can't trust that guy, I can't rely on that guy, and you become just this unreliable figure, and people are going to be less likely to want to have anything to do with you in the future if you don't follow through and do what you said that you were going to do. So you can really, really see this when foreigners come over to Russia, especially I've seen this with Americans, who come and they make some kind of plan, either with friends or with a girlfriend or with someone who they've met, and they say, I will meet you at this place at this time. They agree on it. In Russian, it's always important to end this kind of conversation with the word договорились, мы договорились. This means we have agreed, we've made an agreement, we've come to an agreement. And when you do this, when you come to an agreement with someone, then you have to follow through. If you don't, then it looks really, really bad on you. And no one else is going to think that, they're trying to control you or infringing on your freedom to change your mind or something. You gave your word, so you should do it. I mean, it seems logical, right? It seems very logical. It seems like everyone should be like that. But unfortunately, English speakers have a tendency not to follow through, especially when we compare those actions with Russian speakers. Now, again, I'm not talking about everyone. I'm sure that a lot of you out there who are watching this, who are really ambitious and wanting to learn the Russian language, don't act like that, right? Because you're smart and you follow through and you're reliable and you don't lie to people. But it's really serious. It's a lot bigger than you might think. So when you give your word in Russian, you have to do that. You should do that. And if you cannot follow through, you should really contact that person and let them know why, and let them know that you're sorry that you can't do what you promised. And you might not think of it as a promise immediately from the English point of view, but when you say that you will do it, that's a promise. So how does this connect into our whole topic today of being rude, of how Russians are rude? It sounds like Americans and English speakers are rude, right? Well, sometimes we are. But actions speaking louder than words, it seems rude to English speakers when they violate this principle and Russians call them out on it. All right? You told me you would be here at this time. You told me that you would do this. Where are you? Why didn't you follow through? Why didn't you tell me that you weren't going to, right? So this is what might happen. And an English speaker might perceive this as someone being rude to them by infringing on their freedom or rights to change their mind or to change plans. I agree with the Russian point of view here 100%. If you give your word, you should do it. Okay, the last reason that Russian sounds really rude to English speakers and other people is because of conversational style. And this is probably the biggest point. This is probably the main reason why people think that Russian is rude. And it all comes down to really one thing that's really different about how Russian conversations go and how English conversations go. Now, with English conversations, typically, if I tell someone something, for example, I tell my friend that I disagree with his opinion, or I tell him that he's wrong, then this is, again, me confronting him, me starting a conflict or bringing up a conflict or not letting it go, not ignoring it, right? So if he did something that's not true, that's not right, it's wrong, if I call him out on it, it creates this conflict. And a lot of people just want to save face. So they don't want to be called out and they don't want to call other people out. They want to play it safe in English, right? We don't really want to confront them. Oh, he has his opinion and I have my opinion, and let's let everybody have their opinion and let's not infringe on anybody's opinion. Well, it's not like that in Russian. In Russian, if you have a really good friend, they will confront you. They will bring up this small point of conflict. And you'll argue. And you'll discuss. And at the end of the argument, you're left with your own opinions, but you're still friends. Whereas with a lot of English speakers, if we have an argument, this might be a sign or an indication that we're not really friends. We don't see things the same way, right? So at the end of this argument or confrontation, both people might end up going in their own direction and then remembering this and carrying around this grudge with them and thinking, oh, he said that thing last week and I really don't like him because of that. Well, in Russian conversation, people argue all the time and disagree with each other all the time. And so to Westerners, it might seem like this is a confrontation. It might seem like an argument. But to Russian speakers, this is a discussion. You said something and I said, no, it's not like that. And we discussed it. And that means that we're now closer, not further apart. We're now closer because we both shared our opinion. We both were patient enough to hear the other person out. We discussed it. And maybe at the end of the conversation, one person got the last word or didn't, or one person was louder and the other one wasn't. It doesn't matter. At the end, we remain people who can still be friends, who can still have their own opinions. And sure, again, I'm sure that a lot of you who are watching are going to say, well, Chris, it's not really like that in English, right? It's not always like if someone disagrees with you, you're not going to be their friend. I really hope that it is like that. But I'm sure you know someone who takes these things to heart and really is sensitive about their own opinions and if someone disagrees with them. And I'm sure that you've been presented with the situation where somebody does say something that you want to argue with, or you want to tell them that it's not true or not correct, but you don't. You bite your tongue and you hold back because you know that it would initiate a conflict or create a confrontation. And you want to avoid confrontation because that's the conversational style in English. The style is we should be polite and respectful of other people's opinions, and we shouldn't disagree or argue with them. Just let them have their opinion, and if they're wrong, that's fine. Just let them go do that, right? Just let them be wrong on their own. Whereas in Russian, it's, I feel so strongly, and I really want you to know the truth and know the right thing, so I'm going to argue, and I'm going to tell you that that's not true. And I know it's not true because of this and this and this, and then we'll discuss it. And then in the end, if I convinced you, okay, great. And if I didn't, okay, fine. And then we can move on, and we can continue to spend time together, and we can leave that behind us. So, I know that this whole explanation, everything that I've said in this video, you'll probably find some faults with it, some things that you don't personally feel are true, whether you're Russian or English or anything between. You'll probably find something that you disagree with. And that's fine. You can leave a comment down below. In fact, if you go look at my other videos on this channel, you'll find lots of Russian people telling me that, they have one context where what I've said is not true, or there's an example of something that could be presented differently, or, you'll find lots of those kinds of comments here on this YouTube channel. And you'll find a lot of them from Russian speakers. And if you look at my other channels, you'll find the same thing. So when I see those kinds of comments, I don't take them personally. I just know that here's a person who just spent their time trying to communicate to me what they believe in. And that allows me to respect them more because now I know that they're passionate about this and they care. Whereas if they just ignore and they just say, oh, yes, okay, fine, then I don't really know what they think. And so really, we should wrap this video up by saying that although all of these reasons, and probably a few more, exist for why we as Westerners think that Russians and Russian speakers and the Russian language is rude, on the other hand, while that's true, on the other hand, Russians think that English speakers and the English language is insincere. And my explanation of why we think Russian is rude should illuminate the facts of why Russians think that about us. Because we have more please and thank you, even when it's unnecessary. We say, excuse me, a lot in situations with people who we don't really know. Whereas in Russian, when you don't know someone, you really don't have to be polite and you don't have to go out of you don't really have to say anything to them, right? Some people do. A lot of people don't. In English, we use all of these extra words, indirect language, just to make sure that the person doesn't think that it's a conflict, just to show them that we're nice and we're polite, right? Even though, again, we might not really feel like that. So again, it feels insincere to Russian speakers. Actions speaking louder than words. We flake out, we flake off, we don't follow through all the time. Just, if you don't believe me, speak to some Russian speakers and you'll understand their pain. Because really, it's a noticeable thing when you put yourself in a group of people where they always follow through and where this is very important, like with Russians. So it's really, really a big deal. Just do what you say you're going to do. And then the conversational style, again. English speakers tend to avoid conflict, tend to just allow everyone to go their separate way, and then in the end, a lot of them hold this negative feeling about the person who had a different opinion, instead of just voicing it, getting it all out in the open, and then leaving it there and moving forward. right? So there's a lot of reasons why Russians might think that we sound and behave insincerely, and there's a lot of reasons why we might think and feel that Russians are rude. What's true? What's right? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Let me know in the comments below this video. And if you want to learn how to speak Russian, right? A lot of people learn Russian, study Russian at schools, universities. They read all of these classic authors and they read about Russia, learn so much about the history of Russia and the literature of Russia, but they never learn how to speak the modern language that exists today. If you want to learn how to speak Russian so that you can communicate with real Russian people, I'm not talking about Soviet people who, immigrated a long time ago and saved that old style and old way of thinking and speaking. I'm not talking about Soviet people. I'm talking about Russian people today. If you want to speak the modern language of Russian, then I have a program for you. It's called Russian Club. We speak every week, and you can join by clicking the link under this video. Me and native speakers of Russian who are professional teachers of Russian will help you to start speaking as quickly as possible. It doesn't take months and months and months for you to speak Russian. People have seen results and started speaking in as few as 5 lessons. 4 or 5 lessons. It can happen really fast, even if you're starting from 0. So if you're interested, just click the link under this video. You can come over and join our Russian club. It's actually really affordable, and it's really a great chance for you to speak Russian. So if you're studying at a university or somewhere else and you've only been learning academic Russian or the history of Russia or the literature of Russia, you need this. You really need this. I've met a lot of university students. That's all they learn. They learn Soviet Russian instead of modern Russian. That's what we do. So click the link under this video if you're interested. Also, if you like this video, if you like what we're doing on this channel, just click like, click subscribe, and leave a comment down below and let me know that we're doing a good job. And I will see everybody next week. All right? Have a great day. Bye-bye.